Within Ian Buchanan's The Fear of Boredom, we are put in conversation with boredom as a concept and forced to grapple with and understand the ways that a mundane and seemingly insignificant feeling have much broader implications surrounding our mental health and our understanding of ourselves in relation to our environments and the stimulus that we do and do not ingest and internalize. At the beginning of Buchanan's The Fear of Boredom, we are already placed within the airport, which is a space understood to be filled with the antiquated and arbitrary processes of waiting in line only to then wait even further for transportation that then may make us wait even longer within the airport before its arrival and right before its takeoff. Boredom as a process and as a feeling are associated with the mundane and everyday. However, Ian Buchanan seeks to understand it through a lens that puts us in conversation with the stimulus that we do and do not choose to prioritize within our lives, and calls into question, consequently, the contentious relationship that we have with boredom, and says that it may have the capacity to frame our understandings of our relationship to time and our relationship to waiting. This relationship to waiting, and especially boredom, is established by Buchanan when he says, "Boredom is something like this. It is simultaneously a walling off from external stimuli and a negation of internal stimuli. It is in this sense that is a defense against the present. It is both a rejection of a situation and a protection against it. To be bored waiting for a plane means that time has reasserted itself in a paradoxical way. On the one hand, it has lengthened. The moment seems never to pass. It becomes bloated, expanding without end. But on the other hand, we do nothing to shorten it. Indeed, we refuse to pass the time and thus make time pass." I love this quote in particular by Buchanan because it helped fill in the gaps of my own understanding when it came to what it was about boredom that people found so temporally disturbing. When it came to my own personal engagements with boredom, it was always more so a minor inconvenience or what I perceived to be a space of time to not be stimulated by the outside world. When everything that you say and do within capitalist society has implications within relation to your work ethic and how you prioritize your time, I always found breaks from work through the mundane where I am being neither stimulated by something I want or don't want to be more of an active practice that allowed for me to decompress from stimulus and distance myself from the need to do or the need to feel my actions implicated. This, however, stood in stark contrast to the image of boredom that Buchanan was able to paint for me. Boredom for many is not simply a feeling or a sensation as much as it is a fixed position in time that they are placed within, where their agency over how they choose to stimulate themselves is stripped from them in a position where it feels as though anything you want to do, you don't have the time for in that moment, and thus anything that you don't want to do is taken from you and placed upon you at the same time. This description of boredom, however, helped me draw many parallels between that and the much more societally prioritized state of being of depression. Depression, also a state of existing which temporarily strips its subject of the ability to stimulate or engage themselves in the way that they would like, I feel provides us an interesting analysis of which that we can understand the broader implications and connections that boredom has on our mental health, our state of being, and the ways in which we choose to actively engage the world around us. And so, Moving forward with this understanding that boredom as a feeling and as a position in time is much less heavily researched compared to its other emotional counterparts such as happiness or anger or sadness, I strive primarily to just create the necessary link between boredom and depression and how we experience both, so that way we may come out of this with a better understanding of how understanding our relationship to waiting may provide a better understanding of our relationship to sadness and negative mental health in general. One study that lays the groundwork for understanding the relationships between boredom and depression would be the development of leisure boredom in early adolescence. I really like this study in particular because it does a very good job of addressing how boredom may end up affecting the ways in which we experience mental health later on down the line in life. It's a study that addresses ages 10 to 14 in an adolescent study which seeks to understand the relationships between leisure boredom established to be engagements with activities and fun and just existing. It tries to draw that connection between the youth who get to experience that at earlier ages versus later ages in order to see the extent to which they develop delinquent tendencies in relation to their performance in school or their behavioral performance overall. And after the self-reported tracking of these individuals over the course of multiple years, it was concluded that whilst experiencing boredom did not relate to elevated levels of delinquent tendency, it does, however, correlate very heavily with the depression that these individuals would end up experiencing as a result. This already helps lay the groundwork for establishing boredom and depression seemingly having somewhat of a symbiotic relationship where they feed off of one another in a sense. Boredom and depression both being moments of time in which an individual is positioned in a space of time where they are dissatisfied with their reality and their circumstances, yet seemingly feel as though the agency to do something about it has been stripped out of their hands. And it is through this engagement with boredom that we are put in conversation with the different ways that it drives us to act and whether or not those actions are actually productive in a grand sense and in the sense of helping us cope with boredom. Boredom is typically put in conversation with the responses that it evokes because it is used as either an adaptive or maladaptive behavior generator of sorts. Boredom is understood in the positive sense to be a neutral stimulus that evokes people to act towards change in some kind of way in order to acquire whatever stimulus that they're after. However, this source in particular does a good job of establishing the kinds of behaviors that people are willing to engage in out of boredom and the extent to which they are positive or negatively adapted for the situations that the person finds themselves within. This does a good job of situating us within an understanding of the actual kinds of behaviors that boredom drives us to engage within, and whether or not that also provides us insight into the ways that people engage with and experience their depression. Boredom, in regards to the adaptive behaviors, was associated with physical activity, fulfillment of duties, and pro-social behavior, all behaviors associated with fulfillment and the betterment of the individual for the sake of getting rid of the negative feelings associated with boredom, as to where the more maladaptive behaviors that people were tested for within the study was along the lines of drug and smoking inhibition, problematic eating, alcohol consumption, self-inflicted injury and aggression, social withdrawal, and rule violation, etc. This, however, led to the conclusive results of the study that, unlike depression, boredom does seem to have a much higher correlation with a variety of adaptive and maladaptive behaviors that it evokes as a result. As to where depression is an innately stifling force that puts people in a state of paralysis with their choices and what they find themselves able to do, boredom, whilst it does evoke the same feelings, through this study was proven to have a variety of impacts on the individual that put themselves in conversation with what they want to do with a much broader set of topics and engagements. This led me to wanting to get a real-life example of an individual who struggles with boredom and struggles with depression, so that way we may have an anonymous understanding of the extent to which individuals grappling with mental health find themselves to identify with these overarching claims of boredom being something that drives them to act, but still in the same sense feeling very similar to the social patterns and ways of behavior that depression tends to orient individuals. Alright, and so we are here with Anonymous. And so the very first question that I wanted to ask is, as someone who deals with depression, how exactly do you find your mental health and your depression to be informed by boredom? And how similarly would you say that the two feelings are to one another in how that you experience them?
I think the relationship I have to boredom is pretty interesting because I don't know. I feel like being depressed casts this effect of numbing everything. You know, you're doomed to be bored. Like, you just don't have the average emotions that one would have to, like, the daily pleasures of life. And so, like, because you're living with depression, you just become accustomed to being bored and being numb and just feeling a bit on the outside of it all.
And so, because you feel a bit on the outside of everything, whilst also being a numb to everything, do you feel as though there's a certain lack of agency or taking away of agency that these sensations are forcing onto you in a way?
I guess you're left asking yourself, how could you pursue more?
All right, thank you for that. And when it comes to the second and final question, how exactly would you say that you've seen the ways that boredom and depression drives you to act, if at all, of course, and any commonalities that you see between the two, since you've already established that the feelings are the same? So I would, of course, love to know whether or not the responses to it are similar as well.
I would say that boredom and depression cause me for inaction, that you just don't want to act as much, and that you try to seek micro successes because it just feels tiring to continue. So, the easiest thing I do is send an email, possibly make a call to reschedule for something because, that's the easiest thing to do. And if I can't even bring myself to do that, the phone is just a simple access to pleasures of watching videos or listening to music, just anything to get your mind off your lack of productivity or trying to be productive.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So in a way, you would definitely say the phone is like an equalizer of sorts amongst boredom and depression, whether you're lacking stimulation or looking to engage in some form of productivity, some form of action when dealing with feelings of incapacitation of sorts. Be it, albeit whether it be due to boredom or depression, you would say that like the phone seems to be a very common denominator of something to like reach for.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well then, thank you so much.